The boarding process had been loud, chaotic, and forgettable, exactly the way domestic flights in America always were. Gate B-17 buzzed with phone notifications, crying toddlers, arguments over carry-on sizes. Business travelers rushed ahead, eyes locked on imaginary deadlines. Families shuffled together like migrating birds. Somewhere in that noise, she boarded quietly. Seat 14C. No one noticed her sit down. She wore a faded gray hoodie pulled low, sneakers scuffed from years of use, backpack wedged under the seat in front of her. Her hair was tied back with no effort, no makeup, no attempt to be memorable. If you passed her in a grocery store aisle, you wouldn't remember her face 5 minutes later. That was the point. She had perfected invisibility. The man in 14B sighed loudly as he buckled his seatbelt, already annoyed by the flight he hadn't even taken yet. The woman in 14D complained to her friend about legroom and turbulence statistics she'd read online. Neither asked her name. Neither looked twice. She slid her headphones on, not playing music yet, just blocking the world. Her eyes stayed on the safety card tucked into the seatback pocket, not reading it, remembering it. Outside, the Boeing 737 rolled slowly away from the gate. Engines hummed, low and steady, the sound blending into the background of modern life. The captain's voice came over the intercom, friendly, rehearsed, calm. Estimated flight time, 2 hours and 12 minutes. Weather, light turbulence over the Midwest. Nothing unusual. She closed her eyes as the aircraft taxied. The past always crept in during takeoff. She counted silently as the engine spooled. 1, 2, 3. The nose lifted. Gravity pressed her into the seat. Somewhere behind her, someone whooped nervously. Someone else prayed. The plane climbed smoothly, banking east, sunlight flashing across the cabin windows. At 10,000 feet, the chime sounded. Seatbelt signs off. The cabin exhaled. So did she. The flight attendants moved with mechanical cheer. Coffee orders, pretzels, jokes they'd told 1,000 times. One of them paused at her row, glanced at her hoodie, and barely slowed. "Drink?" the attendant asked, already reaching for the next row. "Water," she said softly. The attendant handed it over without comment, never meeting her eyes. Invisible. As the plane leveled off, clouds stretched endlessly below them, white and peaceful like a lie. She stared out the window, fingers resting on her knees. They were steady, always steady, even when her chest tightened, even when her thoughts wandered to places she'd locked away. She hadn't planned on thinking today. She'd chosen this flight because it was cheap, because it was anonymous, because no one would know her here, because she believed nothing would happen. An hour passed. Laptops clicked open. The cabin lights dimmed slightly. A movie flickered on seatback screens. The hum of the engines became comforting, hypnotic. The man in 14B fell asleep, mouth open. The woman in 14D laughed quietly at something on her phone. Then, the plane shuddered. Not turbulence, not the gentle bump passengers joked about. This was violent, sudden, sharp enough to snap heads up and send a ripple of confusion through the cabin. "What was that?" someone asked. Before anyone could answer, it happened again, harder. The aircraft dropped. Not much, just enough. Enough for stomachs to lift, enough for drinks to slosh, enough for fear to spark like static electricity. A baby cried, someone cursed. The seatbelt sign chimed on mid-drop, too late to be comforting. The engines changed pitch. That's when she opened her eyes. She didn't gasp, she didn't grab the armrests. Her gaze snapped to the wing, tracking the vibration, the angle, the rhythm. Her jaw tightened, not in panic but recognition. The lights flickered once, then twice. A third jolt slammed through the fuselage, harder than the first two. Overhead bins rattled. A suitcase thudded loudly. Screams began to rise, scattered at first, then overlapping. "Oxygen masks," someone shouted. The panels above them opened, plastic masks dropping like pale flowers. The cabin descended into chaos. She was already moving. She pulled her own mask down, slipped it over her face with practiced ease, securing it before helping the elderly man across the aisle whose hands shook too violently to manage the straps. He stared at her, eyes wide, breath hitching. "Breathe," she told him, calm, firm, slow. The plane lurched again, steeper this time. Screams turned into sobs. A flight attendant stumbled, catching herself on a seatback. "Everyone stay seated," the attendant yelled, voice breaking. "Please remain seated." The girl in 14C ignored her. She pressed her hand against the window, watching the wing flex unnaturally. She counted again. Seconds between vibrations, the sound of airflow, the absence of something she expected to hear. Her heart began to pound, not with fear but urgency. Something was very wrong. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Static swallowed half his words. "Ladies and gentlemen, experiencing please remain." Silence. A second passed. Then another. No follow-up, no reassurance, no calm authority to cling to. The plane dropped sharply, sending a wave of screams rolling forward through the cabin. The woman in 14D grabbed the armrest, crying openly now. The man in 14B jolted awake, shouting. The girl in 14C unbuckled her seatbelt. The flight attendant rushed toward her immediately, panic flashing across her face. "Miss, you need to stay seated." The girl stood anyway, bracing herself as the aircraft rocked violently. She looked at the attendant, not with fear, not with defiance, but with certainty. "Both pilots are incapacitated," she said. The words were quiet. They hit like a gunshot. The attendant froze, mouth opening but no sound coming out. Around them, passengers continued screaming, unaware that something far worse than turbulence was unfolding. The plane pitched downward again, sharper this time, fast enough to make gravity feel optional. The girl in 14C grabbed the seatback, eyes already locked forward toward the cockpit door. She took one step into the aisle. And the flight began to fall. The aircraft dropped hard enough to knock the breath out of the cabin. A collective scream surged forward like a wave, bouncing off the walls, the ceiling, the fear. Luggage burst from an overhead bin 2 rows back, crashing into the aisle. A man yelled a name. Someone prayed out loud. The floor tilted just enough to make standing feel like balancing on ice. The girl from 14C tightened her grip on the seatback and steadied herself. "Miss," the flight attendant shouted again, panic cracking through her training. "You have to sit down now." "I can't," the girl said. Her voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. That was what made the attendant hesitate. Another violent shudder ripped through the fuselage. The lights flickered and went dim, leaving the cabin bathed in an eerie half-glow. Oxygen masks swung wildly, smacking faces, tangling in hair. The smell of recycled air mixed with fear and something sharper, hot metal, faint but unmistakable. The engines changed pitch again. Not louder, not quieter. "Wrong." The girl's eyes snapped to the wing once more. She watched the vibration travel along the metal skin, felt it through her feet. Her jaw tightened. The rhythm was uneven now, a stutter where there should have been consistency. The flight attendant grabbed her arm. "Please," she begged, no longer authoritative, just human. "You're going to get hurt." The girl gently but firmly pulled free. "If I sit down," she said, "everyone will." That wasn't a threat, it was a fact. The plane lurched left, sharp and sudden, throwing passengers against their seatbelts. A child screamed. Someone vomited. The aisle tilted just enough for the flight attendant to stumble backward, catching herself on a headrest. The girl used the moment. She moved forward, one careful step at a time, bracing against seats as the aircraft bucked like it was fighting something invisible. People shouted at her now, angry, terrified voices cutting through the chaos. "Sit down. What are you doing? You're going to kill us." A man reached out, trying to grab her backpack. She twisted away without breaking stride. "Let her go," someone else yelled, though even they sounded unsure. Another announcement crackled through the speakers, static, garbled, unintelligible. The voice wasn't steady. It wasn't calm. It sounded distant, strained, then vanished again. Silence followed. The kind of silence that terrified people more than screaming ever could. The girl stopped halfway down the aisle. She closed her eyes for half a second and listened. Not to the passengers, not to the crying, to the aircraft. She felt it through the soles of her shoes, through the vibration in her chest, the way the nose dipped too easily, the way the correction lagged, the absence of coordinated control. Her pulse accelerated. She was right. The cockpit door loomed ahead, thin, reinforced, locked, a barrier meant to protect everyone from the outside threat. But the threat was already inside. The flight attendant caught up to her again, breathless now, tears streaking down her face. "Who are you?" she demanded, desperation overtaking protocol. "What do you think you're doing?" The girl met her eyes. "I'm trying to keep us alive." The plane dropped again, steeper than before. Screams turned raw, animal. A man in first class slammed his fist into his armrest, shouting for the captain. A woman clutched her rosary so tightly her knuckles went white. The flight attendant looked forward, looked back, then made a decision she would replay for the rest of her life. She reached for the cockpit door phone. No response. She tried again. Nothing. Her hands trembled. The girl leaned in close and spoke low, so only the attendant could hear her over the chaos. "The longer we wait," she said, "the harder it will be to recover." "Recover from what?" the attendant whispered. The girl didn't answer. She didn't have time. Another jolt slammed them sideways. The cabin tilted sharply right, sending loose items skidding. Someone hit the ceiling with a sickening thud. The smell of fear thickened, heavy and suffocating. The attendant's training screamed at her to stop this. Every rule, every procedure, every warning told her this was wrong. But the aircraft wasn't responding like it should. And the girl wasn't acting like a passenger. She rattled off numbers under her breath now, airspeed guesses, altitude approximations. Her eyes tracked the nose angle instinctively, her body adjusting before the plane even finished its movement. The attendant swallowed hard. "What do you know about flying?" she asked. The girl hesitated for the first time. "Just a fraction of a second." "Enough," she said. The cockpit door shuddered as the plane dropped again. Somewhere up front, a warning alarm blared, muffled but unmistakable. The sound cut through the cabin like a knife. The attendant's face drained of color. She keyed the emergency code with shaking fingers. Nothing. Her breath hitched. The code didn't disengage. "Move," the girl said. She reached up, braced herself against the bulkhead, and pounded on the cockpit door. Not wildly, not in panic, but with controlled force. "Cockpit," she shouted. "This is an emergency. Respond." No answer. She pounded again. Still nothing. The plane banked sharply left, hard enough to throw both of them into the wall. Passengers screamed as gravity shifted, pressing them sideways. A glass bottle shattered somewhere behind them. The girl slammed her shoulder into the door. "Open it," she shouted, voice rising now, not in fear but command. Silence. The attendant's eyes filled with tears. "Oh God," she whispered. The girl stepped back, breathing hard, then looked at the attendant. "You have a crash axe." The attendant blinked. "What?" "Behind the panel," the girl said. "You have one." The attendant hesitated. Another violent shudder ripped through the plane, sharper than any before. The nose dipped dramatically, enough to send screams spiraling into hysteria. That did it. The attendant ripped open the compartment, hands shaking as she pulled out the axe. She stared at it like it weighed 100 pounds. The girl took it. She didn't swing immediately. She listened again, felt the aircraft, counted the seconds between dips, waited for the right moment. Then she struck. The sound echoed through the cabin, metal on reinforced material, loud and terrifying. Passengers screamed louder, convinced this was the end. She struck again. And again. The door cracked. On the fourth blow, it gave way just enough to pry open. The girl shoved it hard. Inside the cockpit, the sight stole the breath from the attendant's lungs. The captain slumped forward, unmoving, oxygen mask hanging uselessly at his side. The first officer was pale, eyes half open, hands slack on the controls. Warning lights flooded the panel in angry reds and ambers. Alarms screamed unchecked. The plane lurched violently. The girl stepped forward without hesitation. "We're running out of time," she said. And she reached for the controls. For half a second, no one moved. The cockpit smelled wrong, stale air, sweat, something acrid beneath it. Warning alarms screamed in layered tones, overlapping, relentless. Red and amber lights blinked across the instrument panel like a city on fire. The yoke trembled in the first officer's limp hands as the aircraft lurched again, nose dipping, then struggling to recover. The flight attendant staggered back a step, horror freezing her in place. "Oh my God," she whispered. The girl from 14C didn't stop. She reached past the unconscious first officer, disengaged his grip, and pulled the yoke toward her with controlled force. Her movements were fast but precise, muscle memory taking over before fear had time to argue. The aircraft responded slightly, just enough to tell her she still had something to work with. Not much. Behind them, the cockpit doorway filled with faces. Passengers had unbuckled, ignoring shouted orders, driven forward by terror and curiosity. A man in a suit stared in disbelief. A woman clutched her phone, recording with shaking hands. Someone yelled, "What's happening?" Another screamed for the pilots. The flight attendant turned, panic surging. "Everyone get back, please get back to your seats." No one listened. "Who is she?" someone shouted. "Why is she touching that?" The girl glanced over her shoulder once. They saw it then, not fear, not confusion, but focus so intense it bordered on cold. She looked like she belonged there. That terrified them more than anything else. "She's not a pilot," a man yelled. "This is insane." The plane shuddered violently, alarms rising in pitch. The girl pushed the throttles forward slightly, then eased them back, listening, feeling for response. One engine lagged. The other protested with an uneven whine. Her chest tightened. Hydraulics were struggling. Control authority was degrading. "Everyone needs to sit down," she said sharply, voice cutting through the chaos. "Now." "Who do you think you are?" the man shouted back. The aircraft dropped again, harder than before. Screams erupted as gravity vanished for a terrifying moment. Bodies lifted against belts. Phones flew. Someone slammed into the ceiling, crying out in pain. The nose pitched downward aggressively, ground invisible but rushing closer by the second. The girl corrected instinctively, fighting the controls as if wrestling something alive. Her jaw clenched, arms burning, sweat breaking across her forehead. The plane leveled barely. Silence followed, thick, fragile. She exhaled through her nose, then spoke again, lower this time but with unmistakable authority. "I am the only thing between you and the ground," she said, "so if you want to live, sit down." No one argued after that. One by one, shaken passengers retreated, stumbling back to their seats, eyes never leaving the cockpit. The flight attendant slammed the door shut and locked it, hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped the latch. Her breath came in short, panicked bursts. "Who are you?" she demanded again. "Really?" The girl didn't look at her. Her eyes were locked on the instruments, scanning, prioritizing, discarding what didn't matter. Airspeed unstable, altitude bleeding off, autopilot disengaged hard, flight director gone. "I was hoping I wouldn't have to answer that," she said. Another alarm blared, angrier, more urgent. The flight attendant flinched. "They're dead, aren't they?" "No," the girl said quickly. "Unconscious. Hypoxia, maybe. Could be smoke, could be pressurization issues earlier." She glanced at the captain's chest. "They're breathing." That was something. The girl grabbed the oxygen mask, fitted it properly over the captain's face, then did the same for the first officer. She switched flows, adjusted valves, hands moving with professional speed. The flight attendant stared. "You've done this before." The girl hesitated. "Just for a heartbeat." "Yes," she said, "a long time ago." She reached for the radio panel and keyed the mic. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she said, voice steady despite the chaos roaring around her. "This is Flight 372, both pilots incapacitated. I am attempting manual recovery." There was a pause. Then the radio exploded with voices. "Flight 372, say again. Identify yourself. Who is flying the aircraft?" The girl swallowed. She hadn't said her name out loud in years. "This is," she stopped herself, tried again. "This is a qualified aviator assuming control. We are experiencing partial engine failure and degraded flight controls. Request immediate vectors and nearest suitable runway." The silence on the other end was deafening. Controllers didn't like uncertainty. They liked checklists, certifications, call signs, not ghosts appearing out of seat 14C. "Flight 372, a new voice came on, older, firmer. "Confirm your credentials." The girl stared at the artificial horizon, watched it wobble dangerously. "I don't have time," she said. The plane dipped again, violently enough to throw the flight attendant against the bulkhead. She cried out, grabbing a handle to stay upright. "We're losing altitude," the girl continued. "You can question me later, or you can help me now." Another pause. "Then radar confirms your descent. Nearest airport is 80 miles west. Weather is unstable." 80 miles might as well have been 800. Her pulse hammered in her ears. She adjusted trim, compensating for asymmetrical thrust. The plane fought her every move, sluggish and angry. Behind the cockpit door, passengers held their breath, listening to the sounds no one wanted to understand. The flight attendant wiped tears from her face. "You're really doing this," she said softly. "You're really flying the plane." The girl didn't answer. Her mind had gone somewhere else, backward, years backward. Runways at dawn, checklists memorized, simulators, a voice yelling her name in a headset, a mistake she couldn't undo. She shoved the memory away. "Not now." "ATC," she said into the mic, "I need you to be honest with me." The controller hesitated. "Go ahead." "Are we still controllable?" The answer took too long. "Barely," the voice said, "and you're running out of margin." Her fingers tightened around the yoke. The flight attendant stared at her, realization settling in like ice. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. "Are you?" The girl shook her head once. "No," she said. "I walked away from this life for a reason." Another alarm screamed, fuel imbalance. She closed her eyes for half a second, then reopened them, sharper than before. "But if I don't do this," she added quietly, "everyone dies." The plane jolted violently again, dropping fast enough to send a fresh wave of screams echoing through the cabin walls. On the radar screens below, controllers watched Flight 372 bleed altitude, an unstable blip among hundreds of ordinary flights. In seat 14C, a hoodie lay abandoned. And in the cockpit, A woman the world had forgotten tightened her grip on the controls, knowing the hardest part was still ahead. The cockpit smelled of ozone, metal, and fear. Warning lights flashed like a blood-red sunrise across the instrument panels. The yoke trembled slightly beneath her hands, a stubborn reminder that the aircraft was alive and furious, resisting every attempt to regain control. Outside, clouds churned like boiling milk, the sky bleeding gray as the Midwest thunderstorm bore down. Her breathing was controlled, almost ritualistic. Every flick of a switch, every throttle adjustment was executed with mechanical precision, trained instinct overriding shock. She was calm, but not naturally. It had taken years of discipline, years of experience she never thought she would use again. The flight attendant stood just behind her, clutching the doorframe like it was the last anchor to sanity. "I don't understand," she said, voice trembling. "Who are you? Why do you know how to do all this?" The girl didn't answer immediately. Her eyes scanned the altimeter, speed, and attitude indicator in a single fluid motion. "I didn't expect to be back here," she said finally. "Not like this. Not after what happened." The attendant's brows furrowed. "What happened?" Her gaze flickered to the captain slumped forward. He looked human, but in her mind, he was a ghost. He could not fly, not now, not at this altitude, not in this storm. She remembered the cold, sharp reality of a cockpit years ago, when a single lapse had taken everything she'd loved. Her career had ended the day she walked away, leaving the life she trained for. She'd been a rising star in the aviation world, a promising fighter pilot in a program notorious for demanding perfection. But perfection was a myth, and one tragic incident had ruined her career. A single error she didn't commit, yet took responsibility for. Her license revoked. Her reputation destroyed. The life she knew vanished overnight, leaving her invisible in a world that once celebrated her. Now, years later, she had chosen anonymity. Seat 14C, hoodie up. No one would know her. No one would ask her name. She was invisible because being seen meant being vulnerable, meant being judged, meant facing that ghost again. But ghosts had a way of catching up, and she had no choice now. The plane pitched violently to the left, snapping her out of memory. A lightning bolt illuminated the storm outside, momentarily revealing the stricken aircraft's full wingspan, a twisted sculpture of metal and tension. Her hands moved with instinctive precision. One engine was failing. The other was sputtering inconsistently. Hydraulics were partially compromised. Flight control surfaces resisted every input. Her stomach twisted, not with fear but recognition. She'd seen this before, during simulations, during emergencies, during moments that had defined her life. "This isn't just turbulence," she muttered. Behind her, the flight attendant swallowed audibly. "How bad is it?" She didn't answer. Instead, she keyed the radio, fingers flying over the buttons. "Mayday, mayday," she said, voice calm but authoritative. "Flight 372, 2 pilots incapacitated. Manual control. Request vectors to nearest runway. Immediate assistance required." Static. Then a voice. "Flight 372, identify yourself." She hesitated. A name had power. Names had history. Her name carried baggage, memories, accusations. If she spoke it, she would reveal herself. She would no longer be invisible. "I am qualified to fly this aircraft," she said carefully. "Request vectors. We are in a critical emergency." Silence. The controller's voice returned, cautious and skeptical. "Radar confirms altitude loss. You are descending rapidly. Are you certified to operate the aircraft?" Her jaw clenched. "I am," she said. "I can keep this plane airborne, but only with your cooperation. Every second counts." Behind her, the first officer's head lolled slightly, unconscious. The captain remained slumped forward, mask dangling uselessly. She had to act fast. She had no room for hesitation. Her mind raced through memories she thought she'd buried. Training drills, emergency protocols, simulators. The instant recognition of cockpit instruments in crisis. Every muscle remembered what the mind had tried to forget. This was her arena again, but it wasn't glory or fame driving her. It was survival, her own and everyone else. Lightning flashed again, illuminating the turbulent sky. The plane bucked violently, throwing loose objects across the cabin and spilling oxygen masks. In the cockpit, she adjusted the throttle, counteracting a sudden drop in speed. Instruments screamed. The plane protested. She pressed forward anyway. Another memory cut through, the day she had failed, the day her career ended. She remembered the moment she promised herself she would never fly again, that she would disappear. But that promise had never included moments like this. "This is the only way," she muttered, "the only way to fix what's broken." The flight attendant glanced at her, eyes wide with disbelief. You really left everything behind." She didn't respond, her focus on stabilizing the aircraft. Flaps adjusted, throttles modulated. The storm outside roared like a beast demanding tribute. "Brace," she muttered suddenly. The flight attendant's eyes widened. "Brace, what's happening?" The girl's hands moved faster, calculating angles, adjusting pitch, trimming, monitoring instruments. She was preparing for the first real decision of the flight, a maneuver that would either save them or destroy them. Her mind flashed forward to the inevitable landing. The storm, the damaged plane, the storm-battered runway, it all waited ahead. A choice loomed, one that could not be undone. The plane tilted sharply as she fought to maintain altitude. Every second counted. Every fraction of a degree mattered. Her hands burned, sweat dripping down her temples. Her focus was absolute. And in that moment, the flight attendant finally understood. This quiet, unnoticed girl from 14C had a past no one knew, but a skill no one could question. She wasn't just a passenger, she was their only hope. But even hope had limits. And the storm was far from done. The plane groaned like a living creature in pain. Red and amber lights flashed across the cockpit, a staccato warning of mechanical systems pushed to their limits. One engine sputtered, coughing flames across the panel. The other vibrated unevenly, as if rebelling. Every instrument screamed urgency, every gauge told the same story. The aircraft was dying. The girl from 14C gritted her teeth, pressing her palms against the yoke. Her knuckles whitened. Sweat dripped down her temples, stinging her eyes. Outside, lightning tore the sky apart, illuminating the wings bent under strain, flaps trembling like frightened birds. The storm seemed to anticipate her every move, twisting turbulence into a physical wall she had to fight through. "Hydraulics are failing," she muttered, almost to herself. "Left wing is heavier, compensating." She adjusted the trim with split-second precision, easing the yoke into subtle movements, feeling the aircraft respond reluctantly. Her mind worked faster than any passenger could comprehend, calculating thrust, drag, wind shear, descent rates, and angles of attack simultaneously. Behind her, the flight attendant held onto the bulkhead with white-knuckled desperation. Is she really flying this thing?" she whispered, voice trembling. She's a kid." "Not a kid," the girl said without looking back, "but I have to act like one." A sudden jolt threw the plane sideways. The overhead bins shook violently, spilling contents. Passengers screamed as the aircraft pitched sharply downward, gravity taking everyone by surprise. Drinks splashed, screams collided with alarms, a baby wailed. Chaos surrounded her, but she ignored it. Every movement had to be perfect. One wrong input and they all died. She keyed the radio. "Flight 372 to ATC. Immediate vectors to nearest runway. I'm taking manual control." Static. Then a voice returned, tense and skeptical. "Flight 372, are you qualified? You don't have clearance." "Do not waste time questioning me," she snapped. "We're losing altitude fast. Give me the best approach and runway now." Silence again. Seconds stretched, suffocating in their importance. The storm battered the fuselage. Wind sheared across the wings. Turbulence tossed the aircraft like a toy. Her fingers danced across the throttles, adjusting, compensating, coaxing the plane to respond. Her jaw was tight, her breath controlled, her eyes locked on the instruments and the horizon outside, where black clouds churned ominously. Another warning blared: fuel imbalance. One engine had lost significant output. The left wing dipped slightly, threatening a stall. She slammed rudder input to counter it, feeling the aircraft shudder violently. In the cabin, passengers screamed again, some clinging to seats, others bracing for the inevitable. The flight attendant whispered prayers under her breath. The girl's eyes flicked to the captain and first officer, slumped forward. She felt the weight of their helplessness, the collective fear of 200 souls, and something inside her clicked. She could do this. She had to do this. Flaps extended partially but not fully. The wing wouldn't take full deflection without risking structural failure. The plane was delicate now, a wounded animal fighting for air. She adjusted throttle, altitude, and trim in tandem, a symphony of precise movements under extreme duress. ATC, she keyed the mic again, voice calm but firm. I need a straight vector. Weather's worsening. I can't bank too hard, engines aren't responding equally. Recommend runway and landing instructions immediately. A voice responded, urgency laced through every word. Flight 372, we have you. Approach heading 270. Runway 24L weather, severe crosswinds, gusts up to 60 knots. You will have to execute a non-standard landing. Can you confirm? Her heart pounded. 60-knot gusts on a failing 737 with damaged hydraulics and an engine sputtering. Most pilots would consider that a death sentence. She exhaled slowly, suppressing the flash of panic. I understand, she said. Proceed. The plane rocked violently, turbulence sending her against the yoke. She countered, muscles burning, hands trembling, sweat dripping onto the instrument panel. One wing dipped dangerously, the other resisted. The aircraft groaned like metal being torn apart. She remembered something from years ago, an emergency simulation where a similar failure had forced her to improvise. The memory was vivid, precise throttle adjustments, calculated rudder inputs, flaps partially extended. The simulation had been near impossible, designed to fail even the most skilled pilots, but she had succeeded then. She could do it now. The ground appeared through breaks in the storm clouds. Flashes of lightning illuminated the wet runway miles ahead. She adjusted approach angle, compensating for the wind gusts. The plane responded, but barely. Another jolt, instruments rattled, warning sirens screamed, fuel imbalance worsened. She gritted her teeth. Every input mattered. One misstep, one hesitation, and the plane could roll, spin, or dive. Her mind raced. Flight path, altitude, wind, thrust, hydraulics. Every calculation was instantaneous. Every muscle remembered, every memory sharpened her reflexes. She whispered to herself, not today, not this time. The first officer stirred slightly, groaning. She glanced briefly, slumped, pale, unconscious. The captain's head lolled against the panel. The responsibility pressed on her chest like a physical weight. She swallowed it down. There was no time for fear. The plane pitched again. The wind screamed against the fuselage. A lightning bolt split the sky, illuminating the terrified faces pressed against the windows. Brace for corrective input, she muttered to herself. Her fingers shifted the throttles. Rudder adjustments, precise aileron corrections. Every second, every fraction mattered. The cabin lurched, glass rattled, screams mixed with alarms. The flight attendant clutched the bulkhead, silent tears streaking her face. She whispered, God help us. The girl in 14C didn't look at her. She couldn't. She had to fight for every foot of altitude, every degree of correction. Failure was not an option. And then it hit her, a sudden realization. The aircraft was responding slightly, slowly, not perfectly, but enough. The combination of instinct, memory, and precision was giving her a fighting chance. The storm was relentless. The engines were unstable, and the runway was still miles away. But for the first time since the shuddering began, she could see a path forward. She exhaled, tight and controlled. Her pulse was still racing, her muscles on fire, but she smiled slightly, a small, grim acknowledgement of her ability. But the moment was brief. A gust slammed the left wing again. The warning alarms crescendoed. Fuel imbalance worsened. Every passenger now clutched their seat or prayed aloud. She leaned forward, hands firm, voice low but commanding. "This isn't over, not yet. We're not done, hold on." The plane pitched again, violently. And ahead, lightning illuminated the runway, a strip of hope amidst a storm of chaos. The fight wasn't over, but now she was ready. The girl's hands gripped the yoke until her knuckles burned white. Outside, the storm screamed, lightning cracking the sky like giant fractured glass. Rain slammed against the fuselage, hammering the wings, rocking the aircraft like a toy in a bath. The 737 was alive and angry. The radio crackled. "Flight 372, runway 24L is clear, but crosswinds are extreme. Recommend emergency landing procedures. Confirm you can manage the approach." She exhaled sharply, eyes scanning the instruments and the horizon simultaneously. One engine was losing thrust rapidly, the other hesitated in fits. Flaps were partially extended, more risk could tear the wings apart. Hydraulic pressure was unstable, leaving control surfaces sluggish. The aircraft wouldn't respond like it should. The thought came immediately, brutally. This runway conventional landing might not work. Most of them would die. Too many variables, too much risk. She closed her eyes for a second. Her mind flashed back to her training years ago. Simulations, night emergencies, the day she had made impossible decisions before she had the right to. Mistakes had cost her career, but her instincts had always been true. Now she had to trust them. She opened her eyes, focused. "There's another way," she muttered. She keyed the radio. "ATC, listen carefully. Standard procedure will not work. I need permission to attempt a non-standard landing approach." Silence. Then the controller's voice, tense, almost incredulous. "Non-standard. That's highly dangerous. Flight 372, confirm you are fully qualified." "I am," she cut in, voice calm, cutting through static and storm. "I've landed in worse conditions. Trust me, we have no choice." The first officer groaned, shifting slightly in his seat, unconscious still. The captain remained slumped, oxygen mask dangling uselessly. 2 lives depended on her, but this wasn't just them. The passengers, too, all 200 of them, hung in a delicate balance between survival and disaster. She exhaled. "I'll either get us down or we all die," she whispered, mostly to herself. Her mind raced through calculations. She could land straight onto the runway, risk the crosswinds, risk engine failure, risk structural collapse. Or she could attempt a maneuver, one she'd practiced in simulations once years ago in the dead of night. Risky, precise, and borderline impossible. It could save more people but left almost no margin for error. She glanced down at the fuel gauges. They were running low, very low. Every second wasted reduced the margin. Panic tugged at her thoughts, but she shoved it aside. Focus, precision, instinct. The plane lurched violently. She adjusted the throttles, countering the asymmetrical thrust. Flaps barely responded. Wind gusts slammed against the wings. Lightning split the sky. "Brace," she muttered suddenly. Not the passengers, they were already bracing, but herself. Her body tensed for what she knew would be violent. She shifted into the maneuver. The plane rolled slightly, banking against the storm, engines screaming in protest. The controls resisted her. The fuselage groaned. Warning lights flashed red across the panel like a swarm of angry eyes. But she pushed forward, instinct overriding fear, every muscle in her body remembering what her mind had tried to forget. The storm was a living barrier, twisting, pushing, pulling. The runway appeared intermittently through sheets of rain and flashes of lightning. The left wing dipped dangerously. She fought it with aileron, rudder, and throttle adjustments, tiny microcorrections executed in perfect succession. One wrong input could flip them into disaster. "God help us," the flight attendant whispered, gripping the bulkhead so tightly her knuckles went white. Another jolt. The engine sputtered. Fuel imbalance worsened. She pressed the throttles forward slightly, carefully, cautiously, coaxing the engines to respond. Her pulse was a drum in her ears. Adrenaline burned through her veins. Sweat ran down her face. She had never felt more alive and terrified in the same moment. Another flash of lightning illuminated the cabin. The passengers' faces were pale, frozen in fear, eyes wide, clinging to whatever was solid. She stole a quick glance at the aisle behind her. 200 lives depended on a series of precise movements, decisions, and sheer luck. The maneuver required one more adjustment, risking a partial wing collapse by increasing flaps and lowering the landing gear into turbulent airflow. Structural limits would be tested. One miscalculation, and they would roll, spin, or crash before touching the ground. Her hands moved with terrifying precision. Flaps down, gear extended. She adjusted thrust, countered drift, monitored airspeed. The aircraft groaned under stress, but it remained intact, just barely. "Hold on," she whispered to herself, tightening her grip. The runway appeared clearer now, a strip of hope slicing through the storm clouds. Rain pounded the fuselage. Wind battered the wings. Visibility was poor. The left wing shuddered dangerously, threatening stall. She compensated instinctively, counteracting with rudder and aileron, throttle fine-tuning. Seconds stretched. She calculated distances, angles, descent rates. Every fraction of a degree mattered. One mistake and all of them were gone. The first officer stirred again, groaning weakly. The captain remained still. She had to act. No time to wait for them to recover. The plane groaned under her control, metal bending under stress. "Almost there," she muttered. "Almost." Lightning split the sky again, illuminating the runway in bursts of white. She could see puddles reflecting light across the asphalt. Crosswinds howled. She held her breath. Every instinct, every memory, every ounce of skill, every failure and success from her past converged in this one impossible, terrifying moment. Then she whispered to herself, "This is it." The aircraft tilted dangerously as she aligned it with the runway. Engines protested. Hydraulics strained. The storm raged like a living force determined to beat them down. She pressed forward, focused entirely on one thing. The impossible choice had been made. There was no turning back. And the ground was rushing up faster than anyone dared to measure. The world outside the cockpit was chaos distilled into sight, sound, and motion. Rain pelted the fuselage like thousands of tiny hammers. Lightning split the sky with blinding intensity, revealing the runway in flashes, so close, yet still terrifyingly far. The storm whipped the plane violently, shaking it like a toy caught in a storm drain. Inside, the girl from 14C gritted her teeth, fingers white on the yoke. Every input mattered. Every twitch, every adjustment could mean life or death. The 737 groaned under the strain of partial engine power, flaps extended almost to their structural limit, and hydraulics screaming for relief. "Hold her steady," she muttered to herself, almost a prayer. "Steady, steady." The aircraft pitched, rolled, and dipped violently. Gravity seemed to double, then vanish, as turbulence threw the fuselage into sudden, unpredictable movements. Behind her, the flight attendant clutched the cockpit doorframe, face pale, silent, too stunned to scream. 200 passengers were bracing, praying, screaming, crying, all unaware that survival had been reduced to inches, fractions of seconds. Every microsecond mattered. She keyed the mic. "Flight 372 to ATC. I have runway in sight. Begin emergency response prep. We are attempting a landing." Static, then a voice tense, almost incredulous. "Copy Flight 372. Emergency crews standing by, winds gusting at 60 knots. You're attempting. Yes, she said, voice firm. Attempting, brace yourselves. Another violent shudder rocked the aircraft. The left wing dipped sharply. She countered with rudder and aileron. The fuselage screamed, warning alarms blaring. The engine sputtered, coughing fire across the panel. She adjusted throttles, balancing asymmetrical power, coaxing the aircraft as if it were a living creature resisting pain. She glanced briefly at the first officer. His eyes flickered open, groaning. The captain remained slumped. She didn't have time to worry about them. Her focus was absolute. The runway rushed closer. Puddles reflected the intermittent lightning. The crosswinds howled, bending the plane sideways. She calculated descent rate, airspeed, flare angle, touchdown timing. Every variable pushed her skills to their limit. Another jolt. A gust slammed the left wing violently. She fought instinctively, pushing rudder, easing the yoke, adjusting throttle. The fuselage groaned. Alarms screamed. Sweat streamed down her face. Muscles burned. She could hear passengers screaming behind her, but it was distant, almost irrelevant. Her mind narrowed to one point, the runway. She began the flare, lifting the nose to reduce descent speed just above the tarmac. The plane shuddered violently. Flaps held under the strain, partially extended, ready to tear if misaligned. Engine sputtered again. The landing gear slammed down. A sickening crunch echoed through the cabin. The left main gear bent slightly under stress. Sparks flew against wet asphalt. The plane skidded, sliding sideways under the force of wind and misaligned landing gear. Passengers screamed anew, gripping seats, bracing. The flight attendant pressed against the bulkhead, silent tears streaming. She fought the controls with everything left, rudder, throttles, ailerons, tiny corrections executed in a perfect sequence. The plane groaned, metal bending, tires squealing against wet tarmac. Each second was an eternity. Water sprayed from the runway. Rain lashed the fuselage. Lightning illuminated every detail. Passengers gripping arms, oxygen masks dangling, the girl's hood plastered with sweat and rain. The right main gear hit solid. The left shuddered but held. Sparks danced beneath the wing. The nose was still high. She eased it down slowly, every fraction of a degree critical. Another gust hit. The plane lurched violently. Tires squealed. Alarms screamed. The runway blurred under sheets of water. Then contact. The main wheels locked. The plane bounced slightly, skidded. She corrected instantly. Nose down. Reverse thrust. Rudder adjustments. Slowly, agonizingly, it began to stabilize. Passengers screamed, half in terror, half in relief. The flight attendant clutched the ceiling panel, silent, trembling, eyes wide. The runway lights reflected on puddles as the plane skidded to a stop. Smoke from the tires mingled with the storm's rain. The engines coughed, shuddered, but the plane was alive. 200 souls were alive. She exhaled sharply, almost collapsing forward, hands shaking. The cockpit was silent except for the soft hum of unstable engines and the steady patter of rain. Behind her, the flight attendant finally spoke, voice quivering. You did it. You saved them." The girl didn't answer immediately. She stared at the instrument panel, still scanning, still calculating. One instinctive movement, one correction, could still ruin everything. Finally, she allowed herself to look out at the passengers. Faces pale, eyes wide, some crying, some shaking uncontrollably, all alive. Relief swept the cabin, mingled with disbelief. They had survived. Emergency crews raced down the runway, lights flashing through the storm. She keyed the mic. Flight 372, landed, everyone alive, emergency response required, over. Silence, then, copy Flight 372, incredible, everyone on board is safe. Yes, she said softly, everyone is safe. The cockpit door opened. Passengers and crew stared at her. The flight attendant stepped forward, tears streaking her face. You were just seat 14C. She nodded faintly, exhausted, hoodie plastered with sweat, hair damp, eyes bloodshot but alert. I was unnoticed, she said quietly. Until now. Passengers began to file out, hugging strangers, crying, whispering prayers of thanks. Cameras flashed outside as emergency crews moved in. Reporters would later call it a miracle, a story of survival that defied all odds. But for her, there was no glory. Only the weight of 200 lives saved, and a storm that had nearly broken her, not just the plane, but the memory of everything she had left behind. She stepped out of the cockpit. For a moment people stared at her, recognition dawning. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she blended into the chaos, hoodie up, silent, unnoticed once more. Her work was done, but the storm had left its mark, not just on the aircraft but on her soul. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she knew the world would never forget seat 14C. The storm had passed, leaving a washed-out gray dawn over the airport. Emergency crews swarmed the runway, flashing lights reflecting off puddles on the tarmac. Fire trucks, ambulances, police vehicles, all converged on Flight 372. 200 passengers, shaken and drenched, began to disembark. Faces pale, voices trembling, some in tears, some in stunned silence. Through it all, the girl from 14C walked unnoticed. Her hoodie was soaked, clinging to her frame, hair plastered to her face. Her hands still bore faint bruises from the yoke. Her chest heaved with exertion, adrenaline finally ebbing. She didn't need cheers, applause, or cameras. The lives she saved were enough. Passengers stumbled down the aisle, whispering to each other in disbelief. One woman in 16B clutched her rosary and whispered, "I can't believe we survived." A man in 12D shook his head, muttering, I thought we were done." The flight attendant who had watched the entire scene unfold approached the cockpit door slowly. Her face was pale, eyes wide. She swallowed hard, still trying to process what she had witnessed. I don't understand," she said. Her voice trembled. You were seat 14C, you were a passenger. You saved us." The girl nodded faintly, voice barely audible. "I did what I had to do." Who are you?" the attendant asked, shaking, tears streaking down her face. The girl's eyes flicked briefly toward the tarmac, where passengers were gathering, some still in shock, others hugging strangers they had never met before. "I'm someone who remembers what it means to survive," she said softly. "Someone who had no choice but to act." Journalists were already arriving, cameras flashing. Emergency crews shouted orders to keep everyone safe. Some passengers held up phones, trying to capture the moment, trying to find the face behind the miracle. But she blended into the background, hoodie low over her eyes, quiet, unassuming. She walked past the crowd, unnoticed. Some people glanced at her, instinctively, sensing something extraordinary but failing to connect the dots. Seat 14C had vanished into the crowd before anyone could even speak her name. Inside her mind, memories of the flight replayed in brutal clarity. The shudders, the screams, the violent gusts of wind, the flashes of lightning, the near impossibility of each maneuver. Her muscles ached, her hands still tingled from gripping the controls. But a strange calm had settled over her. The storm, the chaos, the fear, they had ended. She moved toward the exit of the airport terminal, invisible among the crowds of survivors and onlookers. Families hugged each other tightly. Some passengers wept openly. Emergency responders guided the shaken down corridors, checking vitals, offering blankets, warm drinks, quiet words. News crews set up cameras outside. Helicopters hovered overhead. The story was already forming. 2 pilots incapacitated, a miraculous landing, no casualties. Reporters would later call it an unbelievable act of heroism. Some would speculate about an experienced pilot sneaking on board, a miracle worker, even a guardian angel. No one would know the truth. She slipped past reporters, past survivors, past the flashing lights. Her hoodie was pulled low, eyes forward, silent, invisible. A young boy ran past her, clutching his mother's hand. His wide eyes caught hers for a brief moment. Something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, recognition. He would remember her even if the world wouldn't. Inside, she paused for a moment and allowed herself a deep breath. The adrenaline was gone. Exhaustion replaced it, along with the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had done what no one else could. She had acted when others froze. She had chosen to face fear instead of running from it. Yet she did not linger. She moved through the terminal with practiced invisibility. Not a single camera flash captured her face. Not one passenger or crew member called her name. She remained, as always, unseen. Outside, the storm had left puddles reflecting the early morning sun. She paused, looking down at her reflection, soaked, tired, yet resolute. She saw herself clearly for the first time in years, a girl who had once been invisible, now unforgettable in the lives she had saved, even if no one knew her name. Emergency crews were preparing to release statements. Passengers were being interviewed. The world would soon know about Flight 372, the miraculous landing, the bravery that saved hundreds. But the girl from 14C would remain a mystery, a shadow in the storm, a quiet hero who slipped away before anyone could see her. She walked toward the parking lot. Engines of emergency vehicles hummed behind her. Reporters called out, helicopters circled, cameras clicked. But she ignored it all, hoodie up, head down, footsteps light yet purposeful. Her phone buzzed briefly in her pocket. A text from an old friend appeared, saw the news. "Are you okay?" She paused, fingers hovering over the screen, smiled faintly, then deleted it. No explanations. No hero's story. She didn't need recognition. She never had. The world would talk about the landing, about Flight 372, about the impossible, the miraculous, the hero. But the girl in 14C had vanished, leaving behind only a whisper of her presence, a shadow of courage, a reminder that sometimes the most extraordinary people are the ones no one notices, until it's too late to forget. As she disappeared into the early morning haze, rain still dripping from her hoodie, she thought only of the plane, the passengers, the storm, and the choices that had defined her life. In the end, being invisible had given her the greatest gift, the chance to act when no one else could, and the certainty that her actions mattered, even if no one ever knew. The runway lay behind her, scarred and battered, a monument to survival. The storm clouds had moved on, leaving a quiet, broken calm. Somewhere in the distance, emergency vehicles receded, but she kept moving, silent, unseen, leaving the chaos behind. Seat 14C would never be empty again in memory, not for the passengers, not for the crew, and certainly not for her. She had saved 200 lives, disappeared into the crowd, and reminded the world that sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones no one notices. And as she walked into the sunrise, invisible once more, the world continued, unaware of the storm it had just survived, and the girl who had held it all together.